Han Sol looked up at the giant space station hanging in the black sky. His small transport ship moved closer to the huge round structure. Lights blinked all over its surface. The station was home to the Galactic Academy of Sciences, the most famous school in the known universe. "First time seeing the Academy?" asked the ship's pilot. Han Sol nodded, unable to find words. The space station was bigger than any building on Earth. It orbited the star Proxima Centauri, the closest star to Earth's sun. "You'll get used to it," the pilot said with a smile. Most new students stare like that. Han Sol wasn't just any student. He was one of only 20 humans selected for the alien exchange program this year. At 23 years old, he had finished top of his class in physics at Seoul National University. But here, among the most brilliant minds from hundreds of worlds, he felt small. The transport ship entered a large opening in the station's side. Inside was a busy docking bay filled with strange ships of all shapes and sizes. Some looked like silver teardrops, others resembled giant insects. A few appeared to be nothing more than floating balls of light. Han Sol grabbed his single bag and stepped off the transport. The air smelled clean, but different from Earth. He noticed the gravity felt slightly stronger, making his legs feel heavy. "Han Sol Kim?" A woman with gray-streaked black hair approached him. She wore the blue uniform of Academy staff. "I'm Professor Kilro. I'll be your advisor during your time here." Han Sol bowed slightly. "Thank you for meeting me, Professor." "No need for that," she said with a warm smile. "I was born in Daejeon, but I've been off Earth for 20 years now. I still appreciate seeing another Korean face around here." As they walked through the station's wide hallways, Han Sol tried not to stare at the aliens they passed. A group of tall, thin beings with blue skin walked by, talking in musical tones. A creature that looked like a floating jellyfish hovered near a wall, its tentacles gently touching a screen. "The Academy hosts students and professors from over 200 worlds," Professor Kilro explained. "You'll meet beings with physical forms and mental abilities very different from humans. Some will look down on you because humans are new to space travel. Others will be curious. A few might even be afraid." "Afraid? Of humans?" Han Sol asked, surprised. "Every species has its strengths. Humans have shown great adaptability and unusual problem-solving skills. This makes some of the older spacefaring races nervous." They stopped at a door with Han Sol's name displayed in both Korean and the standard galactic script. The door slid open to reveal a simple room with a bed, desk, and small kitchen area. A large window showed the spectacular view of the star, Proxima Centauri. "Rest today," Professor Kilro said. "Tomorrow at 800 you'll meet your main instructor and the other students in your learning group." Han Sol barely slept that night. His mind was too full of questions and excitement. When morning came, he put on the Academy uniform, a simple gray jumpsuit with the Academy symbol on the chest, and made his way to the classroom shown on his schedule. When he entered the room, 4 students were already there. 2 were clearly human. One was a tall blue-skinned being with 4 arms. The 4th was shorter than Han Sol with metallic-looking skin that reflected the room's lights. "You must be Han Sol," said one of the humans, a young woman with short black hair. "I'm Jiwoo from Busan, engineering and xenobiology focus." She pointed to the other human, a tall woman with glasses. "That's Tae-hee. She doesn't talk much, but she's brilliant at quantum mechanics." The blue 4-armed alien made a gesture that somehow looked like a bow. "I am Doyen of the Arcturian Scientific Collective. My specialty is comprehensive data analysis." His Korean name surprised Han Sol, but he would learn later that many aliens took names from Earth languages when working with humans. Before Han Sol could greet the metallic being, the classroom door slid open. Everyone immediately stood straighter as a large alien entered. The being was nearly 2 meters tall with 6 limbs, gray-green skin, and 4 black eyes, arranged in a diamond pattern on its face. It wore what looked like a flowing robe covered in moving symbols. "I am Professor Taemin," the alien said in perfect Korean, then switched to the standard galactic language. "I will be your primary instructor for advanced universal principles." The professor's 4 eyes scanned the room, stopping briefly on each student. When those eyes settled on Han Sol, He felt a chill. There was intelligence in that gaze, but also something like doubt. "You are the fifth group I have taught this cycle," Professor Taman continued. "You represent 3 species, each with different mental and physical capabilities. My job is not to teach you facts. Facts can be loaded directly into memory banks or neural enhancements for most advanced species." One of the professor's 6 limbs moved to a screen, activating it with a gesture. "My job is to teach you how to solve problems you have never seen, before using principles that apply across all reality." Hansel noticed the professor looked at the human students a bit longer when saying this. Was that doubt in those alien eyes? "Luridians like myself have been exploring space for 15,000 of your Earth years," Professor Taman said. "Arcturians for 9,000, humans for barely 1 century. Yet here you are, admitted to the same academy classes." The professor moved closer to the students. "Some of my colleagues questioned allowing humans into these advanced courses so soon. They believe your species needs more time to develop. I remain unconvinced either way. My evaluations will determine if they are right or wrong." Hansel felt his face grow warm. He hadn't expected to be judged as a representative of his entire species. "Your first assignment is simple," the professor said. "Research the physiological and mental capabilities of your classmates' species. Understand their strengths and limitations. Tomorrow we begin practical exercises that will test those capabilities." After class, Jiwoo approached Hansel. "Don't mind Professor Taman, the Luridians are always like that, thinking their technology makes them superior." "He doesn't seem to think much of humans," Hansel said quietly. "That's why we're here," Jiwoo replied with a smile. "To change their minds. A few of us are meeting to study together later. Join us?" Hansel nodded, feeling slightly better. As he looked out the classroom window at the stars beyond, he wondered what tests lay ahead. Whatever they were, he would need to prove that humans belonged here, among the stars and the ancient spacefaring races. He had no idea that in just 3 months, a simple sealed box would give him that chance. 3 months passed quickly at the Galactic Academy. Hansel spent his days in classes learning things he never imagined possible. He learned about star engines that could move whole solar systems. He studied gravity manipulation and faster-than-light travel theory. At night, he joined study sessions with Jiwoo, Tai-hee, and sometimes Doyeon. Hansel was surprised to find that he could keep up with the other students. The math and physics were advanced, but the basic rules were the same everywhere in the universe. What humans called physics, other species had different names for, but the laws that governed reality worked the same for everyone. Professor Taman's class remained the hardest. The 6-limbed alien never praised anyone directly, but Hansel noticed that the professor spent more time watching the human students lately. Hansel wasn't sure if this was good or bad. One morning, Hansel's communication pad beeped with an urgent message. "All students report to Laboratory 7 immediately." When Hansel arrived at the lab, he found the other students already gathered. Professor Taman stood at the front of the room next to a table covered with a shimmering cloth. "Today begins your mid-term examination," Professor Taman announced. "This test will count for 40% of your final grade." The professor pulled away the cloth. On the table sat 5 identical metal boxes. Each was a perfect cube, about 20 centimeters on each side. They were made of a dark silver metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Each of you will take 1 container," Professor Taman said. "Inside is half of your examination questions on a data crystal. You will receive the other half only after you open your container." Hansel examined the box closely. It had no seams, no buttons, no visible way to open it. The surface was perfectly smooth. "The rules are simple," the professor continued. "You must open the container without damaging what is inside. You may not use any tools. You may not seek help from others. You may not use computer systems to analyze the container." The metallic-skinned student raised a hand. "Professor, what exactly counts as a tool?" "Good question, Seung-ho," Professor Taman replied. "You may not use any physical object to manipulate the container. You may not use any energy emitter. You may change the container's environment, but not with specialized equipment." Hansel noticed the 4-armed Arcturian, Doyeon, looked worried. Even the usually confident Luridian students seemed confused. You have one standard week to complete this task, the professor said. Those who succeed will continue with the course. Those who fail. 4 alien eyes blinked in sequence. Well, let us hope you do not fail. One by one, they each took a container. Han Sol's felt cool and heavy. In his hands, heavier than it looked, maybe 2 or 3 kilograms. He turned it over carefully. Every side looked exactly the same. How was he supposed to open something with no seams? As they left the laboratory, the students were unusually quiet. Even the always friendly Jiwoo seemed deep in thought. Anyone have any ideas? Han Sol finally asked as they walked toward the student quarters. It must be some kind of trick, Jiwoo said. Maybe it responds to sound or light. Doyen shook his blue head. The Luridian testing method often involves seemingly impossible tasks. They believe this reveals true understanding. Tae-hee, who rarely spoke, simply stared at her container with narrowed eyes. When they reached the living quarters, they agreed to meet again the next day to share any progress. Han Sol took his container to his room and placed it on his desk. For hours, he tried different approaches. He spoke to it in various languages. He exposed it to different types of light. He even tried singing to it, remembering stories of voice-activated locks. Nothing worked. The container remained a perfect sealed cube. For the next 3 days, Han Sol tried everything he could think of within the rules. He placed the container in hot water, then in cold water. He put it in bright light, then complete darkness. He even slept with it next to his bed in case it responded to brain waves during sleep cycles. On the 4th day, Han Sol met with his study group again. None of them had made progress. I've tried analyzing the atomic structure, Doyen said, frustration clear in his voice. But without tools, I can only use my natural senses, which are insufficient for this material. I tried using different forms of radiation naturally present in the station, Jiwoo added. Nothing happened. Tae-hee remained silent, turning her container over and over in her hands. That night, Han Sol sat in the station's observation dome, staring out at the stars. The container sat on the bench beside him. He felt defeated. Maybe Professor Taeman was right. Maybe humans weren't ready for this level of education. Trouble with the test? A voice asked. Han Sol turned to see Professor Kilrow taking a seat next to him. I can't help you, she said quickly. That would break the rules. I know, Han Sol sighed. I just don't understand what I'm missing. There's no way to open it. Professor Kilrow looked at the stars. When I first came to the academy 20 years ago, I felt the same way many times. The alien professors think differently than we do. They've had technology for thousands of years that we've only dreamed about. She turned to face Han Sol. But do you know what I learned? The universe follows the same basic rules everywhere. The things that make Earth special, our gravity, our atmosphere, our temperature range, those aren't special at all. They're just our normal. Every species has their normal. Han Sol frowned, looking at the container. So you're saying I need to think about what's normal for this container? I'm not saying anything about the test. Professor Kilrow smiled. I'm just reminiscing about my own time as a student. She stood up. Remember, Han Sol, humans aren't here because we're smarter or stronger than other species. We're here because sometimes we see simple solutions that others miss. After she left, Han Sol picked up the container and really looked at it. Not as an alien puzzle, but as a physical object that had to follow the basic laws of physics. What was the container made of? Some kind of metal alloy, most likely. And what did all metals do under certain conditions? For the first time in days, Han Sol felt a spark of hope. He might not have advanced alien technology or special powers, but he understood physics. And physics worked the same way everywhere in the universe. With new determination, Han Sol headed back to his room. He had 3 days left to test his theory. It was time to remember the basics. Han Sol woke up early the next morning with his mind clear. He remembered his basic physics classes from Earth. All materials in the universe responded to temperature changes. When most things got hot, they expanded. When they got cold, they contracted. Even this strange alien metal must follow that rule. But the container was made of some advanced material. The small temperature changes he had tried so far had no visible effect. He needed something more extreme. Hansol went to the student commons area where many students gathered to study and talk. He spotted Jiwoo sitting alone, staring at her container with tired eyes. "Any luck?" he asked, sitting across from her. She shook her head. "Nothing. I even tried taking it into the garden section where gravity is lower. I thought maybe it was designed to open in specific gravity conditions." "Clever idea," Hansol said. "But it didn't work," Jiwoo sighed. "What about you?" "I'm thinking about temperature," Hansol replied. "But I need something more extreme than just hot or cold water." Jiwoo's eyes widened. "The physics lab has an ultra-freeze unit for superconductor experiments, and the engineering section has heat chambers for testing materials. Would using those count as tools?" Hansol wondered. "Professor Taman said we could change the container's environment, just not with specialized equipment," Jiwoo recalled. "The freeze unit and heat chamber are environments, not tools we'd be using on the container directly." Hansol nodded slowly. "It might work, but I need to think more about how to use them." Just then they saw Doyun enter the commons. The four-armed Arcturian looked unusually stressed. His blue skin had a grayish tint, which Hansol had learned was a sign of exhaustion. For his species, "I have failed," Doyun said as he joined them. "I have tried every passive scan my species can perform without tools. This container defies standard analysis." "You haven't failed yet," Hansol said. "We still have 2 days." Doyun's 4 hands made a complex gesture. "You do not understand. For an Arcturian to admit we do not know something is difficult. Our entire education system is based on complete knowledge and perfect memory." Hansol and Jiwoo exchanged looks. This was the first time they had seen the always confident Arcturian show doubt. "Maybe we're overthinking this," Hansol suggested. "Professor Taman must expect someone to solve it, or it wouldn't be a fair test." "The Luridians don't always care about fair by human standards," Jiwoo pointed out. "Maybe this is a test, to see who will admit defeat gracefully." "No," Hansol shook his head. "The professor wants us to think differently. He's testing our problem-solving, not our knowledge." As they talked, Taehi entered the commons and sat silently at their table. She placed her container down and simply stared at it. "Any ideas, Taehi?" Jiwoo asked. To everyone's surprise, Taehi spoke. "It maintains a constant temperature." Hansol blinked. "What do you mean?" "The container," Taehi said quietly. "No matter where I put it, it quickly returns to the same temperature. It must have some internal mechanism to regulate this." Hansol picked up his own container. She was right. No matter how long he held it in his warm hands, it stayed cool. This was why his earlier temperature experiments hadn't worked. The container was fighting against temperature changes. "That's it," Hansol exclaimed. "If it's working to maintain a specific temperature, then it must use energy to do that. And if we push it hard enough, we might overload that system." Jiwoo finished his thought. Doyun looked confused. "But how would that help open it?" "I'm not sure yet," Hansol admitted. "But it's something to work with." That afternoon, Hansol went to the physics lab. Students were allowed to use the facilities for their studies, as long as they followed safety protocols. He found the ultra-freeze unit unoccupied and signed up for 1 hour of use time. The unit could cool objects to near absolute zero, the coldest possible temperature in the universe. At those temperatures, strange things happened to matter. Some metals became superconductors. Some materials became completely rigid. Hansol placed his container in the cooling chamber and activated the system. Through the clear window, he watched as frost formed on the perfect metal cube. After 30 minutes at the lowest setting, he carefully removed the container using insulated gloves. The container was now covered in a layer of ice, but otherwise looked unchanged. As he watched, the ice began to melt quickly. Within minutes, the container returned to its normal temperature just as Taehi had observed. Hansol frowned. The temperature regulation system was very powerful. He needed to try something more extreme. The next morning, with only 1 day left before the deadline, Hansol had a new idea. If cooling alone didn't work, perhaps rapid temperature change would. He returned to the physics lab and again used the ultrafreeze unit. This time, after removing the frozen container, he immediately went to the engineering section and got permission to use a heat chamber. The heat chamber could reach temperatures of several hundred degrees, hot enough to melt many metals. Hansol set it to its highest safe setting and placed the frozen container inside. Through the chamber's window, he watched as the frost instantly disappeared. After 10 minutes, he carefully removed the hot container using protective gloves and examined it. At first it looked unchanged, but as he turned it slowly in his hands, he noticed something. The faintest line running around the middle of the cube. Hansol's heart beat faster. The sudden change from extreme cold to extreme heat had stressed the container enough to reveal a seam. It wasn't his imagination. The perfectly smooth surface now had a barely visible line. He rushed back to his room and examined the container under his desk light. The line was real, but extremely thin, thinner than a human hair. He couldn't get a fingernail into it, and using any tool would break the rules. Hansol sat back, thinking hard. The temperature change had revealed the seam, but hadn't opened. He needed something more. He remembered Professor Kilro's words. Humans aren't here because we're smarter or stronger than other species. We're here because sometimes we see simple solutions that others miss. What was he missing? The container followed the laws of physics. It expanded when heated and contracted when cooled. The rapid change had stressed it enough to show a seam. Then, it hit him. He needed to create different expansion rates within the container itself. If the outside and inside expanded at different rates, the stress might be enough to break the seal. With renewed hope, Hansol prepared for one final attempt. Tomorrow was the deadline, and he now had a plan that just might work. On the final day of the challenge, Hansol woke up early. He had barely slept, his mind focused on his plan. Today he would either solve the puzzle or fail the test. There was no more time for new ideas. Hansol carefully packed his container into a small bag and headed to the laboratory building. The halls were busier than usual. Word had spread about Professor Tayman's difficult challenge, and many students from other classes were curious to see if anyone would succeed. When Hansol arrived at Laboratory 7, he found Professor Tayman already there, standing tall with all 6 limbs perfectly still. Several other students waited nervously, their sealed containers sitting on the table in front of them. Hansol saw Jiwoo and Doyun, but Taehi wasn't there yet. "Ah, Hansol Kim," Professor Tayman said. "You are early. Good. Do you wish to attempt your solution now, or wait for the others?" Hansol took a deep breath. "I need to use the cooling chamber and the heating platform, not as tools but to change the container's environment." The professor's 4 eyes blinked in their strange pattern. "Interesting. Yes, you may use them." Hansol placed his container in the cooling chamber at the side of the laboratory. He set it to the coldest possible setting. As the other students watched, the container slowly disappeared under a layer of frost. "What are you doing?" Jiwoo whispered. "Basic physics," Hansol replied quietly. "Everything in the universe follows the same rules no matter how advanced the technology." After 20 minutes, the cooling chamber beeped. Hansol opened it and carefully removed the container using insulated gloves. Frost covered the metal cube completely, and cold mist rolled off it in waves. Without waiting, Hansol quickly moved to the heating platform at the front of the laboratory. He placed the frozen container on the platform and set it to its highest setting. "Thermal expansion," Doyun said suddenly, his 4 eyes widening with understanding. "Of course." Professor Tayman moved closer, all 4 eyes focused intently on the container. The other students gathered around to watch. "All materials expand when heated and contract when cooled," Hansol explained as they waited. "Even this advanced alloy must obey the laws of thermodynamics." On the heating platform, the container began to change. The frost melted instantly. Then the metal began to glow slightly as it absorbed the heat. Hansol watched carefully, looking for the thin seam he had discovered earlier. After 5 minutes, he saw it. The line around the middle of the container was now visible to everyone. As the heat continued to build, the line grew slightly wider. The outer shell is expanding faster than the inner components, Hansol continued. The container is fighting to maintain its internal temperature, but the rapid change from extreme cold to extreme heat is creating too much stress. After a few more minutes, Hansol turned off the heating platform. Using the insulated gloves, he picked up the hot container. It was time for the final step. Hansol brought the container to the center table. Everyone watched in silence. Professor Tayman's alien face was unreadable, but his 4 eyes never left the container. The rapid temperature change has stressed the container along its manufacturing seam, Hansol said. Now all it needs is... He gently tapped one corner of the container against the edge of the table. Nothing happened. He tapped it again, slightly harder. Suddenly there was a soft click. The top half of the container shifted slightly. Hansol carefully placed the container on the table. With his gloved hands, he gently pulled at the top half. It lifted smoothly, separating from the bottom half along the perfect seam. Inside was a small crystal that glowed with a soft blue light, the data crystal containing his exam questions. A surprised murmur ran through the room. Even Professor Tayman's usually still posture changed, his upper limbs moving in what might have been surprise. The container was designed to resist direct attempts to open it, Hansol explained. But it couldn't be designed to violate the laws of physics. By creating extreme temperature changes, I forced different expansion rates between the outer shell and the inner components. The stress revealed the manufacturing seam, which had to exist for the container to be made in the first place. The tap just provided the final bit of force needed to separate the already stressed components. Professor Tayman moved forward to examine the opened container. In all my years giving this test, this is the first time I have seen this particular solution. His voice had a new tone that Hansol hadn't heard before. Was it respect? Just then, Tae-hee entered the laboratory. She carried her container to the cooling chamber without saying a word to anyone. 10 minutes later, she repeated Hansol's exact process. Her container opened just as his had. You knew, Hansol said to her with a smile. Tae-hee nodded. I saw you yesterday, but I wanted to understand before I tried. One by one, the other, students attempted different solutions. Some worked with chemicals available in the lab. Others tried sound waves or light patterns. Jiwoo tried Hansol's temperature method and succeeded. Doyun tried a complex procedure involving the station's variable gravity field. By the end of the day, only half the class had managed to open their containers. The Luridian students had the most trouble. They kept looking for technological solutions to what was essentially a simple physics problem. After everyone had made their attempts, Professor Tayman addressed the class. This challenge was designed to test not just your knowledge but your approach to problem solving, the professor said. Some of you looked for complex technological solutions. Others tried to use your species' natural abilities. But the simplest solution came from understanding the fundamental principles of physics. The professor's upper limbs made a gesture toward Hansol. Hansol Kim recognized that even the most advanced technology must obey the basic laws of the universe. This is wisdom. Hansol felt his face grow warm at the unexpected praise. For the first time, he felt like he truly belonged at the Galactic Academy. As they left the laboratory, Jiwoo bumped her shoulder against Hansol's. Not bad for a species that's only been in space for 100 years, she said with a grin. Hansol smiled. Sometimes the oldest knowledge is the most useful, he replied. Physics is physics no matter what planet you're from. A week after the container challenge, life at the Galactic Academy returned to its normal routine. Students hurried between classes, studied in the common areas, and worked on their newly assigned projects. But something had changed for Hansol. Other students, even those from advanced alien species, now nodded to him in the hallways. Some even stopped to talk about his solution to Professor Tayman's test. Hansel sat in the observation dome, working on the second half of his exam questions. The data crystal had contained problems about energy transfer and thermodynamics, exactly the principles he had used to open the container. He smiled at Professor Tamen's clever connection. "Mind if I join you?" a voice asked. Hansel looked up to see Professor Kilrow standing nearby. "Of course, Professor." She sat down beside him and looked out at the stars. "I hear you've become something of a celebrity." Hansel felt his face grow warm. "I just applied basic physics." "Yes," she said, "and that's exactly why it's impressive. The Luridians have developed such advanced technology that they sometimes forget the simple principles behind it all. They look for complex solutions to every problem." She turned to face him. "Your solution is now being discussed among the Academy faculty. Professor Taman has reported it in detail." Hansel blinked in surprise. "Really? But it was just thermal expansion. We learned that in basic physics classes on Earth." "And that's, what makes it significant," Professor Kilrow said. "Humans have been in space for only 100 years. The Luridians have been traveling between stars for 15,000 years. Yet you saw a solution they missed because they've become too dependent on their technology." Hansel thought about this. It made sense. If you had advanced technology for thousands of years, you might forget about simpler approaches. "There's something else," Professor Kilrow continued. "Professor Taman has requested that you join a special research project." "Me?" Hansel couldn't hide his surprise. "Yes. The project studies how different species approach problem solving. Your container solution demonstrated what he calls elegant simplicity, a quality he believes might be more common in younger spacefaring species." Before Hansel could respond, he spotted Jiwoo, Tae-hee, and Doyen entering the observation dome. They saw him and came over. "We've been looking for you," Jiwoo said. "Have you heard the news?" "What news?" Hansel asked. "Professor Taman has changed the group assignments," Doyen explained. "The 4 of us have been selected for special project work. It's a great honor." Tae-hee nodded. "He wants us to work together because we approach problems differently." Professor Kilrow stood up. "I'll leave you to discuss this with your friends." "But Hansel, remember what I said when you first arrived? Humans aren't here because we're smarter or stronger. We're here because we sometimes see solutions others miss." After she left, Hansel and his friends talked excitedly about the special project. Even the usually serious Doyen seemed enthusiastic. "In Arcturian education, we memorize millions of solutions to known problems," Doyen explained. "But your approach taught me something new. Sometimes it's better to return to first principles." Later that day, the 4 students reported to Professor Yue Taman's private laboratory. It was larger than the classroom labs, filled with strange equipment and glowing screens. The professor stood in the center, all 6 limbs busy with different tasks. "Ah, good. You have arrived," Professor Taman said, turning to face them. "Before we begin, I wish to explain why you 4 were selected." The professor gestured to a large screen on the wall. It showed recordings of each of them working on the container challenge. "Hansel Kim," Professor Taman said, "you used fundamental physical principles to solve the problem. Instead of fighting the container's design, you worked with natural laws that the container could not defy." The professor turned to Tae-hee. "You observed carefully and learned from others, then tested your understanding before applying it. This shows wisdom." Next was Jiwoo. "You adapted quickly to new information and built upon it. When Hansel discovered a solution, you immediately understood its principles and successfully applied it. Finally, he addressed Doyen, and you, despite your Arcturian training to rely on established knowledge, were able to recognize the value of a new approach when you saw it. This flexibility is rare among your species." Professor Taman moved to the center of the lab. The Galactic Academy was established 50,000 years ago to bring together the knowledge of all spacefaring species. But knowledge alone is not enough. We must also understand different ways of thinking. The professor's 4 eyes looked at each student in turn. "Humans are new to galactic society. Many of my colleagues believed it was too soon to admit human students to advanced courses. I shared this view. Hansol held his breath, waiting for what would come next. I was wrong, Professor Taman said simply. Your species brings a perspective that older civilizations sometimes lose, the ability to see past complexity to the simple truths beneath. The professor pointed to a strange device in the corner of the lab. This is why I have selected you for a special project. This artifact was discovered last year in a star system near what you call the Orion Nebula. It appears to be at least 1 million years old, far older than any known civilization. No one has been able to determine its purpose or how to activate it. Hansol looked at the artifact with interest. It was a curved piece of metal with strange symbols etched into its surface. It didn't look like much, but if it was truly 1 million years old, it was the oldest alien technology ever found. I believe, Professor Taman continued, that we have been approaching this artifact with too many assumptions based on our own technologies. Perhaps what we need is a fresh perspective, a willingness to consider simpler possibilities. The professor made a gesture that Hansol now recognized as the Luridian equivalent of a respectful bow. Will you help us understand this ancient technology? Not with advanced tools and computers, but with the kind of clear thinking that opened a seemingly impossible container? Hansol looked at his friends. Jiwoo was grinning with excitement. Taehee's eyes were already studying the artifact intently. Doyen stood straighter, all forearms positioned in what Hansol knew was the Arcturian posture of acceptance. We would be honored, Professor, Hansol said. As they gathered around the ancient artifact, Hansol felt a sense of belonging stronger than any he had experienced since arriving at the academy. Here among the stars, far from Earth, humans had found their place. Not because they had the most advanced technology or the longest history in space, but because sometimes the simplest approach was the one that worked best. Physics was physics, no matter where you came from, and understanding the basic rules of the universe was the first step to unlocking its deepest secrets.